Hey everyone, my name's Ben Bolger and welcome to the Expat Blueprint, the channel educating expats to financial freedom. So it was legend Mike Tyson who said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that quote couldn't be more fitting for today's episode. You could spend your whole life planning for the future and chasing your dreams and your goals, but the chances of you having that linear path to success is really unlikely. Life always comes at you when you least expect it. There's very rarely any warning or time to build up to the chaos. It just happens. Now, I'm a big believer in controlling the controllables. What I mean by that is focusing on the things that we can influence and not focusing on things that we can't. By focusing on things that we can control, just creates stress and wasted energy. For example, of course we could get an illness, but don't worry about the illness. Focus on your lifestyle, your diet, your exercise, your mental health. These are the things that you can control. The same is true for our journey to financial freedom. There are things along that journey that will try to throw you off track. But instead of worrying about them, or even worse, pretending that they won't ever happen to you, be ready and think about what can I do to put myself in the best position to recover. So today's podcast is about your emergency fund. So what is an emergency fund? It sounds pretty drastic, right? But really what it is cash set aside for the unexpected incidences in our life which we need to react to immediately. I'm talking about things like a job loss, a medical or dental expense, an emergency flight to go visit a sick family member, or the engine on your car exploded. And what I'm not talking about is a last minute holiday with your friends, down payments on a car or a house, start-up costs for a business, upgrading or replacing things that you have at home. These are all things that should be budgeted for. But look, no one really needs to tell you what an emergency is. Intrinsically, you will know whether it's an emergency or not. So just be honest with yourself. So now we know what an emergency fund is and what it's used for. Why do we actually need it? What does it give us? The two main benefits of an emergency fund are, firstly, peace of mind. Having a backup plan or a strategy for things that could go wrong before they go wrong makes us feel good. Stress doesn't build up because we can feel more confident with our financial decision making because we know if life tries to punch us in the mouth, we're ready for it and we've got our guard up. Secondly, it stops us making poor choices. In an emergency situation where we need to access our money, we're more likely to act impulsively and think irrationally. Sometimes situations feel bigger than they actually are. If we become desperate for cash and we haven't prepared for these situations, we're more likely to use credit cards or high interest lenders like payday lenders. This form of borrowing is really expensive and can very quickly spiral out of control if left unattended for some time. It really should be avoided at all costs. We also want to avoid having to withdraw from any investments to pay for emergencies. People are very keen to rush into investing because it seems a lot more sexy than saving in the bank for emergencies. But skipping this stage could cause you problems down the line. If, for example, you needed to withdraw money from your investments in February, March time last year, when markets have fallen 30% because of the first wave of COVID-19, you'd be taking money from investments that are already down, meaning that you're actually crystallizing those losses. Whereas if you had an emergency fund, you'd be able to spend that cash in the bank and then let your investments recover, like we saw they did in the remainder of 2020. Getting this in place is really crucial before you do anything else. You wouldn't exercise without warming up, or you wouldn't start driving until you put your seatbelt on, because you could get hurt, right? Think of the emergency fund exactly the same way. Right, so what do we need to do and how do we go about it? The first most important thing we need to do is make a budget. Understanding what is coming in and what is going out is crucial. When looking at an emergency fund, we'll specifically be looking at our monthly expenses, as this is what we want to be able to cover if we were to lose our job or if we were forced to take off time because of an illness and so on. Step number 2, once we know what our monthly expenses are, and now we need to have a think about our current employment and our income sources. This will determine how big your emergency fund needs to be. How comfortable are you in your job? Do you work in an industry that can be highly volatile or cyclical, like say construction? Or are you a teacher or a medical professional where you feel fairly comfortable for the longer term? The financial industry would recommend typically 6 months worth of expenses for professionals where you're more vulnerable to being made unemployed, and maybe only just 3 months for those in a pretty steady career. Now this is just a rule of thumb. However, I always ask the expats I work with, within reason, how much cash in your bank account makes you feel safe and secure. Now it's important to strike the right balance between security and, for a lack of better words, stupidity. If you would feel more comfortable with 9 months to a year's worth of expenses, then do so. Obviously, the more you have sat in cash, the less you have working towards your financial goals. Therefore, don't find yourself saving 2-3 years worth of expenses in cash because it's not efficient and you're just losing out. For any expats carrying a lot of debt, maybe you should consider a smaller emergency fund, maybe $1,000 or $1,500. Then turn your attention to paying your debt down as quickly as possible. Consumer debt like credit cards and personal loans will only spiral out of control if you lose your job or you're forced to take time off for medical reasons. We'll come on to how to best pay down that debt in upcoming podcasts. Step 3. So from our budget, we now know what we should be left with every month after expenses. So step 3 is deciding how much we can realistically put aside each month to build up our fund. Now, if this is something you haven't got in place, you need to make it a priority. There's no point dragging this process out. You need to instill some urgency. Step number 4, automate the process. As soon as you get paid, move the money into another account. You're going to be so much more successful doing it this way than waiting to the end of each month to move it. Set up a direct debit or a standing order to another account. To speed up the process of building your emergency fund, find ways to cut back on unnecessary expenditure. Maybe cut back on your weekly dinner out and make it monthly. Sell unwanted items in your house. Bank bonuses or money you receive as gifts. Find other ways to earn extra income. Add all of this to your standing order amount to get to your target quicker. Step 5 is to consider which account to keep it in. The main purpose of the emergency fund isn't to make your money grow. It needs to be accessible but out of mind. So locking up your funds in a fixed term deposit with exit penalties or investing in your emergency fund is a no-go. If you find a high interest account that pays you a little bit of interest, then great, but don't stress if you can't. It does, however, need to go out your current account. So set up another account at your bank or another bank, or even an offshore account, and move the money there. Number 6, hit your goal and be proud of yourself. Well done, you've ticked off one of the early and most important stages of financial planning. This should hopefully give you peace of mind, and you should hopefully have less concerns about money than you did before. So there is everything you need to know about an emergency fund. Think of it as a layer of armor. Unexpected things happen to all of us. We're not immune to bad luck, so make sure you get this step ticked off as soon as possible. If you found this helpful, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel or our podcast. And please share or leave a review, or even better, do both. Let's get this out to as many expats as possible and change people's futures. Remember, introducing someone to financial freedom could be the best gift you could ever give someone. See everyone next week, and remember to always dream big.